He goes out to Iowa and to a quarry and gets a 10-foot tall solid stone pillar and has it shipped to Chicago and has people carve it into a giant that looks like him, that looks like George Hull. And then he takes it back here to Cardiff, New York, and buries it in his brother-in-law's farm and leaves it in the ground for a year. Then he has the brother-in-law call a well digger and tells the well digger to drill to find a well here in this spot, right? And of course they find the Cardiff Giant. And it becomes this huge story, and people are coming from literally hundreds of miles around every day. And every single person is putting a quarter in George Hull's hand. He makes the equivalent of millions off this.
From NCPR, welcome to Northwards. People, ideas, and conversations from and about Northern New York, Vermont, and beyond. I'm Mitch Teich.
Support for the Northwards podcast comes from the J.C. Steinecker and M.E. McDonald Charitable Fund at Adirondack Community Foundation in support of the Adirondack Community Foundation, building stronger Adirondack communities. You gotta stay right there.
Yeah.
Don't gesticulate. Don't move around.
No, there will be no gesticulation. Today is a gesticulation-free episode of Northwards.
Okay. Do I have your word on that?
I can't promise.
Okay. Well,
I talk with my hands. What can I say?
You're an animated fella. If you were a Muppet, who would you be?
If I were a Muppet, I would be Kermit the Frog. I guarantee it. I feel like
that's what I would
constantly trying to keep everybody together and on the same page, and always seeming slightly frazzled.
And you're waving your arms
and waving my arms around. Yes, exactly.
I would probably. I bet a lot of my friends would say, "Oh, you'd be Animal because you're a drummer," but that's boring.
I kind of feel like Fozzie Bear.
Thank you. Oh my God, I've never gotten that before. I appreciate that. I see myself as a Beaker, Bunsen and Beaker.
Actually, you look more like I look more like Bunsen Honeydew. Yeah,
I look more like Bunsen, but I think I behave more like Beaker.
That would be a good if you had to cook up a new line on your bio on social media or a website or something. Looks like Bunsen,
behaves
acts like Beaker. Yeah. That reminds me, actually, years ago. I had to write there's a 6-word memoir project.
Yeah.
Have I told this story already, or you're just familiar with it?
I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
Anyway, my 6-word memoir was "Used to be Oscar, becoming Felix."
Wait, who's Felix? Felix the cat?
No, I'm not talking about Muppets now. I'm talking about The Odd Couple.
Oh, okay. Now I'm with you.
I mean, Oscar and Felix, Ernie and Bert,
right.
But Oscar was always the sloppy one who, Felix goes in to wake Oscar up in their shared apartment and is shaking the area by the pillow. And
right.
Turns out that Oscar's head is down at the other end of the bed, and nobody can tell because it's covered in so much crap.
How many times in your marriage have you drawn a line and chalked down the center of the house so Gretchen knows to stay on her side and you stay on your side?
I have not done that once. But I would definitely say, and you can go into my office and there's still some Oscar tendencies in me, but I identify much more with Felix than I once did anyway.
Yeah, me too. I've always been a pretty organized person, but just by the nature of my expanding social and business life, I've had to become a lot more organized. And so when things are not in their place, both figuratively and literally, I get really, really uncomfortable.
There's a great line from an Odd Couple episode where Felix has annoyed Oscar so much when they're defending themselves in court at one point that Oscar puts Felix on the stand and asks him, when you were in high school, what did your classmates vote you? And his answer was, most likely to interrupt.
Did you get elected any superlatives in your high school yearbook?
I did not. Well, first of all, they were popularity contests, right? And I guess I was not well known enough outside of my
Your school was pretty
friends.
big, though. You went to school in D.C.
I went to school just outside D.C., and we had like 380 in our graduating class in a school of like 1,600. So to be voted most likely to succeed or most likely to hold up a 7-Eleven or whatever, you had to be better known than I was.
Right. Well, which you have done. You just weren't caught, and that's the important thing. I
have not been caught succeeding.
I was voted Mozart in my.
Voted Mozart?
Right, but it was also like spelled wrong, Motzart, which is just one of a number of embarrassing typos and bad design choices that were made for my.
It wasn't most likely to do anything. It was just you were voted Mozart.
Yeah, most likely to Mozart. It was me and my friend John, who's also very musical, and then
He was also Mozart?
It was a tie.
Oh,
like we got the exact same number of votes.
He wasn't Beethoven?
No, he wasn't Beethoven or Schubert. But
he was more like Sherbert.
I'm more of the Sherbert.
Just riffing on the spelling in your yearbook. That's all.
Yeah, it made sense. I was surprised because, I don't know. I didn't want to be elected any of the superlatives, and it didn't mean anything, right? Like, I still play music just because I like to, but I guess that's like the one thing that people knew about me, which I guess was probably the most prominent part of my personality then and now.
And at the same time, it seems like being elected, it would be cool, and it would lose like 90% of its cool points by
the sheer force of being, well, yeah, just being elected for one, and then the fact that it was misspelled, it brings down 98% of the cool points.
How large was your graduating class?
Less than 100.
Wow.
Yeah. My senior photo, I posed with a guitar. I was such a friggin' nerd. Oh, it's embarrassing.
And see, that's changed also. If you go back through my senior high school yearbook, nobody poses with anything. It's just like headshots.
Yeah, right. You're in a suit and tie or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, well, and that was the thing. It's like the boys wore suits and ties.
Yeah.
And the girls, they were like these drape things. They look sort of like graduation gowns, but anyway, they're like identical.
And there wasn't sort of like, was there the big culture around getting your senior photo taken where like?
No, there was a culture of like, this is the day senior photos are being taken.
So it was all done at school.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I had mine done at a studio. I think it might have been like when Sears or JCPenney or whatever still had it. Yeah, I think I might have gone there, but I know so many people who had a professional photographer come and they took photos of them at the park with their instrument.
My son takes senior portraits for people.
Yeah.
The irony is at the beginning when we were talking about Oscar and Felix, Felix Unger on The Odd Couple, his job was he was a portrait photographer.
Oh, at a store?
He's
like
a professional photographer, portrait's a specialty. He had his own photo studio.
Oh, yeah. I did not know that. I have seen. Was there a movie with Jack Lemmon and
Walter Matthau? That was the original one. Neil Simon wrote the play, and then it became a movie, and then it became a TV show, and then it became like 4 more versions of the same TV show.
Wasn't there like a '90s version of the movie also?
Well, there was Grumpy Old Men, which was essentially The Odd Couple, only older.
You know, I'm a fan of Grumpier Old Men. I think the sequel's better.
I couldn't for the life of me remember which was which. Was there a third one? Was there a grumpiest old men?
I don't know. Let's trust our third host
trust
here.
The Google machine. Yes.
Yeah. Grumpier Old Men.
Thank you for asking me, Ethan.
So Grumpier Old Men came out in 1995, and let's skip down to unmade sequel. Wikipedia says the sequel would have seen Jack Lemmon, Walter Matthau, Anne Margaret, and Sophia Loren reprising their roles with their characters embarking on a trip to Italy. Burgess Meredith was also set to reprise his deceased character in a dream sequence. Blah, 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 blah. They didn't make it. And in August of 1997, it was confirmed that Grumpiest Old Men had been canceled.
So we were both sort of well, it's not like one of us was right and one of us was wrong,
right,
but
yeah.
But Grumpiest Old Men was definitely in the plans.
It would have been the title. Of course, what else would it have been? Anyway, today on Northwords,
we're going to talk about words. We seem to talk about words a lot.
I mean, we use words to talk about words.
This is true. We are joined by a guy named Jonathan Brown, who was is an alum of this very station. He worked in the news department at North Country Public Radio about 15 or 20 years ago.
He left here right before I started my career in radio. Wow. Right? In 2010 is when he left?
He left here in 2010.
Yeah, and that's when I got my first radio job. Pretty much.
And I, at that point, was how many years into my radio career? 19? Yeah.
Long
19
time.
years into radio. And it's been longer since then.
It sure has.
Anyway.
What does John Brown do?
He produces a podcast of his own called The Story of Writing, which is it's an interesting podcast. It's much shorter than this. In fact, our conversation that we've been having is actually longer than an entire episode of The Story of Writing.
Okay.
It sounds a little, for people who have been around radio for a while, Garrison Keillor used to do a podcast or a module called The Writer's Almanac, where he highlighted some writerly birthdays and mentioned some stories, then would read a poem or something. This is, I think, a little bit more than that, but it gets into writing history and the impact that writing has had on the world and that writers have had on the world.
So what does every episode look like? It's only 5 minutes. That's not too much time to dive into something. So, what does a typical episode sound like?
Well, glad you asked. A typical episode sounds a little bit like this.
This is The Story of Writing for January 12th, 2026. It is the birthday of the author who wrote, "He could tell by the way animals walked that they were keeping time to some kind of music. Maybe it was the song in their own hearts that they walked to." American writer and photographer Laura Adams Armour was born on this day in 1874. For her book, Waterless Mountain, she was awarded the 1932 Newbery Medal. Another work by Armour, The Forest Pool, was named a Caldecott Honor Book in 1939. Her photographs are in the notable collections of the California Historic Society and museums.
That's a little clip from The Story of Writing, produced and hosted by Jonathan Brown, who is our guest on Northwards today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Well, and congratulations, because doing 1,000 anythings is an impressive accomplishment.
Impressive and a little crazy, but yeah, thank you.
What sparked this series 1,000 episodes ago?
Oh, well, I'm a word nerd, and I've just love words. So I love reading, and I've found through my reading and, through my work as a reporter as well, there's so much information out there, and it's there at our fingertips. If we just look for it a little bit, we can find answers. We can find ways of talking about these things that sometimes feel too big or too scary. We can do this, and that's why I wanted to do this podcast. It just feels like a way of saying, hey, here's this really cool piece of writing, and look what it's done so far.
Well, and that's one of those things that always amazes me about both writing and maybe writing music also, but for the purposes of this conversation, writing books and articles and what have you, it's kind of amazing to think that there are still new things to write, that not everything that ever exists has been written about already.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much. This really comes into play in the fields of science, right? I mean, so one story that I just sort of landed on many months ago was the story of Cassini and Ole Romer and the eclipses on Jupiter. So Cassini, as an astronomer, he had seen scores, maybe hundreds of eclipses of Jupiter, and he noticed that they were taking a different amount of time from time to time. And he said, well, it's probably because light takes a certain amount of time to travel. And he didn't think any more about it. Ole Romer comes along, another astronomer, and he thinks, okay, maybe this is something I can use to calculate the finite speed of light. And he does. And we only know about this because there was a reporter in the room when he presented his findings. We don't really have his findings. We only have this account written by a reporter. But there is a plaque on the observatory in Paris where Romer worked, and it says, in this spot right here was the very first time a human being figured out a law that applies to the entire universe. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But it speaks to, how we drop information, how we drop a thread, how we drop a line of thinking. But somebody else picks it up. And so there are millions of stories like that, and they're just so much fun to find.
What were the shows that inspired you as you sat down and thought, this is how I'm going to present like this love I have for the word?
Selected shorts. I've always loved the readings. And, I liked what Karras and Keeler did with Writer's Almanac. And I just felt that, combining these and my own interest in words and stories and writing and reporting, this could be a little mini podcast. And it is short. The episodes are usually between 3 and 5 minutes long. But I mean for them to just be kind of a daily thing that people can tune into quickly. Some people have told me it's great to be able to listen to the beginning and end of a podcast.
On the way to work in the North Country.
In one sitting, yeah. But it's also kind of a palate cleanser for all these, the longer podcasts. If you're listening to something like Hidden Brain, which is an hour and a half, you can have something in between. And it's important to me that there's this journalistic ethic that I'm sure you're familiar with, but we don't tell people what to think, but we give them a lot to think about. And that's really another point, a mission of this little podcast.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because there was an episode a few days ago as we record this in which you tell us a little bit about the ethnologist from long ago named Signe Rink.
Yeah.
Danish ethnologist who was born and lived in Greenland. And Greenland is obviously in the news quite a lot these days, much more so than it's probably ever been in the news in the United States anyway. But you never raise that point. You just tell us about Signe Rink and what she did there, and let us connect the dots for ourselves. And I guess it seems like, just from what you were saying, this is kind of the point. This is it's an intentional way.
It is. There's so many stories like that. Another recent story that really sticks with me is Damaris Cudworth. I had never heard of this woman. And it turns out that she was a philosopher of, a real weight, real merit. I mean, she really learned her stuff. She was debating John Locke. She was debating Leibniz. She was right in the middle of the most intellectual group of people in the Enlightenment for her time. And how did that happen? Women did not get an education. Well, it turns out her father was a Platonist. He was a Plato professor at their local university, and he saw in his daughter not just someone who could learn, but someone who hungered for it, like he did. So here's a professor who sees in his daughter the same kind of fire or curiosity that he had, and he gave her this amazing education, and in turn, she is arguing, debating with Locke, and refines a great deal of his philosophy. She starts writing her own philosophies, and she is now considered like the cornerstone, the first stone laid in feminist thinking. And none of this happened because there was this intent to start a new movement or try and do this. It was simply because a father looked at his daughter and saw someone who could do this. And he taught her to the best of his ability. And look what we have now because of that.
You had not heard of her before. Where are you finding her story and the Cassini story? And I mean, I'm imagining if this were like 20 years ago or 30 years ago, a big file cabinet like bursting with papers coming out of it, but it's probably a whole bunch of file folders on your laptop.
It is. So it's out there if you look. So when you start looking at histories and one of the things I look for is what has been written or published on this day, and who are the people of note on this day. You find these little entries that have just the tiniest little suggestion of something that might be interesting. And oftentimes they aren't. But every once in a while, you come across somebody like Damaris Cudworth who, really has had an impact on the world. And then the problem is always, okay, now I really have to substantiate this. I have to find 3 sources at least that concur, that this person did this great thing and this is what it means and this is the impact. But that part is also really fun. It's a research endeavor, but it has a touch of journalism to it, I think.
Is that the rewarding part for you, the part the research part, or is it in the what we might call translational medicine, taking the input and turning it into an output that the rest of us are interested in?
I don't know. One of the things I get out of this that means so much to me is seeing how writers of the past and present are finding ways to communicate how we see each other. That seems to mean the most to me. I look at the work of someone like Ida B. Wells. She's amazing. She did all the things that we would want someone in her position to do. She did the research. She wrote about lynchings in an attempt to stop it. And Claire Breed is another amazing example of just landing on someone who I knew nothing about, but she wrote about the Japanese American children who would come to her library. She was a librarian. And then after December 7th, 1941, these Japanese American children were really depressed because they knew they were going to have to go away. And she gave them postcards and said, tell us where you are, tell us how you're doing, and we'll send you books. And she was rattling off in her writing in the Hornbook magazine, the magazine of librarians.
Right.
She's writing about the books that these little kids loved. She saw those kids as people. They weren't immigrants. They weren't Japanese. They were just kids like she used to be. And that spark of recognition is just... it really means a lot to me.
Well, and it dawned on me as I asked that question that I was assuming that you had fun doing this, because otherwise, why do it, right?
Yeah, 1,000 episodes.
When we were corresponding before you came here, as we're setting up this interview, you mentioned a story that you also learned about, and I kind of went looking through your archives to find it, but I was unsuccessful because 1,000 episodes.
1,000 episodes, yeah.
What or who was the Cardiff Giant, and what does the Cardiff Giant have to do with upstate New York?
Well, the story is set in Cardiff, New York, which is down by the Finger Lakes. George Hull was a really ardent atheist. And he goes to...
He was a devout atheist, you could say.
A devout atheist, exactly. And he goes to a tent revival meeting with the intent of converting everyone at the tent revival meeting to atheism. And he is furious when they tell him to go away. And you have to be amazed at someone that thick. Someone who's just someone who, well, you've got to see it my way. You have to do things, you have to think like me, and you're wrong, and all of that. So one of the things that they were talking about in this tent revival meeting were giants of old, as described in the Bible. And one of the things George Hull was saying is, you're crazy if you believe this. So he, again, this is in the 1800s. Before the Civil War, there are no roads as we now know them. There are no trucks as we now know them. He goes out to Iowa and to a quarry and gets a 10-foot tall solid stone pillar and has it shipped to Chicago and has people carve it into a giant that looks like him, that looks like George Hull. And then he takes it back here to Cardiff, New York, and buries it in his brother-in-law's farm and leaves it in the ground for a year. Then he has the brother-in-law call a well digger and tells the well digger to drill, to find a well here in this spot, right? And, of course, they find the Cardiff Giant. And it becomes this huge story, and people are coming from literally hundreds of miles around every day, and every single person is putting a quarter in George Hull's hand. He makes the equivalent of millions off this. And then he sells the thing. And he sells the Giant. But right around the time he sells the Giant, he admits to perpetrating this huge fraud. And it's just such an American story, you know, somebody who's just so certain of their position, and will go to almost any length, spend any money, do anything to prove his position. So there's more to the story, and it involves P.T. Barnum and
I was just
going to
say, this sounds like it was taken right from P.T. Barnum's memoir here.
Yeah, and actually, there's a whole other aspect of this where the guy who buys the statue refuses to sell it to P.T. Barnum. So P.T. Barnum has a fake made, and then P.T. Barnum claims that he has the real one, and this guy who bought the statue doesn't have the real one. And then the guy who actually owns the statue says, well, there's a sucker born every minute.
And George Hull seems like a guy who was in desperate need of a hobby, except that it sounds like this was his hobby.
It was, but he was also a tobacconist. Huh. So that's how he made his money, and that's how he did all this.
I think there is not a person listening to this episode, this interview, who will not bring up George Hull at their next cocktail party.
Yeah. That's another thing this podcast is good for.
What were the blind spots that you had as you started on this journey?
I don't know exactly what the blind spots were. I mean, it's hard for me to articulate on the spot, but there's so much more to everything that we hear about than we are told. There's there's another great public radio show that I think runs on Sunday on NCPR with Al Letts. So the show Reveal, the host always says, he closes out the show, there's always more to the story. And that's where so much ferment happens as you're looking for the whys and the hows of these stories. Whether it's the Cardiff Giant or whether it's Mary Wollstonecraft, and her writing, or someone more modern. I was reading not too long ago. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She has written a number of books, and she's won a Genius Grant, and she was comparing Harper Lee to Faulkner. And she said, at least Harper Lee wrote in a way that didn't make slavery appear to be inevitable. And so I read things like that, and I start wondering, what does that even mean? Like, how do I find out more about that?
Right.
So the blind spots really do present themselves often, but chasing them down is it's great. It really is a really fun part of this. So all the blind spots, I don't even know if I could list any. I certainly couldn't list all of them, but yeah, and they keep coming, and I love it when I find them. Unless it's 11:30 at night and I have to get this thing done.
Well, and I think about this, and there's probably no better time to be producing a show like this, because you have access to so many more rabbit holes than if you had been doing this 15 or 20 years ago.
Absolutely. It's funny to see in movies and TV shows, when people go to the card catalog in the library. And I remember doing that a lot when I was in school. But just to be able to, type something into, the search bar and have something come back that starts to get at an answer, that really it makes life easier, certainly, in the access of the information, but then as I said, it all has to be nailed down. I've got to find other sources that can substantiate the things that I find.
Right, you can't just assume that the speed of light was measured in this way because you read it on a single website.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. What do you think the bigger picture is? How does the story of writing fit into the larger world beyond the pod sphere, if you will?
Oh boy, I wish I had an answer for that. I don't know. I think that one of the things that I really loved about the podcast, the comments from listeners, and one person just wrote, I really love this podcast. It's uplifting. And I had no intention of making, I never even assumed I had the ability to make something that was uplifting. But people hear it and they start listening every day, and it starts to subtly change, I think, some perspectives. If only in the sense that, oh, so that's where this comes from. One of the things I found that it's just an oddity, but it's kind of a fun one. In the U.S. we say apples and oranges when we're talking about different things. Somebody says, what about this and what about that? We say, well, that's apples and oranges. There's another, so that comparison of unlike things has different wordings all over the world. And one of my favorites is love and the eye of an axe. Whoever came up with that one, they win. That's love in the eye of an axe,
Well, and it's nice to find out that not all of these things were dreamt up by Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm. That
because
is nice.
It seems like no matter what the aphorism is, it was Shakespeare. And there's a lot more on heaven and earth than Shakespeare dreamt up.
That's right. That's right. And it is funny that someone like Shakespeare or Walt Disney even, they're hard for me to write about. There's very little I can say, that's going to be new or groundbreaking. I was talking about on one episode, I was talking about the writing of Hillary Clinton. Which is like, I don't know, the third rail of things to talk about, right, in the world. But
like her big Benghazi novel.
Right. But there are people, there are written works that there is so much information about. We sort of lose ourselves as we try to find anything new or to try to find anything that something to hold on to. With Shakespeare, I love Shakespeare's writing. I love the plays. I love the sonnets. But what am I going to say about him?
I gather that you've also been able to take your experience doing this and use it to inform some curricula?
Yeah, that's right. That's a really fun aspect of this. Apparently, the podcast has legs. Who knew? So my neighbor, Kiki Britt, who is brilliant and has been teaching thousands of people for years and years. She said she's a listener, and she said you have to turn this into a curriculum of some sort. And she said take it to universities, take it to schools. So I took it to the principal of my kid's school, and he said, "Boy, we could really use something like this." Especially after the pandemic, because so many students have a tough time with public speaking. And podcasting is a great way to help people with public speaking, of course. But there's a whole other aspect of this. So I started turning some of the episodes, some of the info that I've gathered into lessons, just, writing up lesson plans. And I realized that as I'm preparing to speak with teachers and other administrators, a simple recorder, put in the hands of anyone, sparks curiosity. It sparks inquisitiveness. And inquiry is the thing I feel we really need, these days. A little bit of skepticism, but a lot of inquiry. Like, okay, so what does that mean? Or if that's true, then what about this? And so talking with students and teachers about just inquisitiveness and then putting a device in their hands. I don't know if this happened to you, but when I first started as a reporter, I was working in a newspaper. And I went over to the radio station. They wanted me to, see if I could produce a story. They handed me the equipment and said, go get a story. If it's any good, we'll put it on the air. And I said, great. How do I turn this on? But just holding it in my hands felt like I had a tool. And it was so powerful. So putting that in the hands of, a 14-year-old who's got a lot of questions and doesn't really know maybe how to frame them, that's really powerful and it's really fun. And to help with ELA, English Language Arts as they're calling it now, it's a great thing. And as it turns out, I was talking with some BOCES folks here in St. Lawrence County, and they said this fits perfectly with one of the state education department's chief goals about communication, about public speaking, and how to actively listen and actively participate in debate. So yeah, this has a lot of legs, and it's just starting now, but it's getting really interesting and really fun really quickly.
Well, and it's interesting to think about because we were talking about like the idea of taking something that we hear in this podcast and mentioning it at a cocktail party, if any of us actually go to cocktail parties anymore. But I think about, and I don't know if this is you as well, but I feel maybe infinitely less inhibited when I have a microphone in my hand than if I, the microphone over the course of my 35 years in radio has meant that I have talked to 1 million more people than I would have otherwise, even though for most of them there was nothing literally keeping me from talking to them, but like it was this instrument that gave me license to be inquisitive.
Exactly. And before it was the microphone, it was the notepad. So all of us know, everyone who has worked in media know about all of the shy people who have gone into media because they found this exact thing. Holding a notepad and a pencil or holding a recording device or a camera makes things easier. It's not always easy, but it can make things a lot easier to just start talking with someone and getting their perspective. That is a wonderful thing. That is one of the best things. So to be, still in that world where I'm still able to help people reach out to others, talk, form questions, really listen to what other people are saying, it's great.
Got anything special planned for the 1,000th episode?
I don't know. I think I might do something like this. Maybe I'll just play this interview. I'll play this Northwards episode. Yeah,
cross promotion.
Little cross promotion. Yeah, I think there should be a parade, but not in February. Maybe in the warmer months.
Jonathan Brown, congratulations again. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Oh, thank you very much. This is great.
Here's to another 1,000.
Oh boy.
Jonathan Brown is the producer and host of the podcast The Story of Writing, which will mark its 1,000th episode in the middle of February. You'll find a link to the whole series at ncpr.org/northwards. We should mention that Jonathan Brown was a member of the news department at North Country Public Radio, where we produce this podcast back from 2006 to 2010.
What have you been reading, Mitch?
I have been reading, a couple of books for interviews that are coming up on Northwards in the spring, but I've finally picked up the book that is my daughter's favorite book, and my wife loves it as well. My son even read it and was less impressed, but he thinks he would like it more now that he's a little bit older. Mm-hmm. It's Anthony Doerr's All the Light We Cannot See, which won the Pulitzer Prize a few years ago and is set during World War II. And like 40 pages into it, but
You're hooked?
I'm so far so good, and I completely understand why people found it such a compelling read. And
Awesome.
you, what are you reading?
I just picked up a couple of books from the library. I had a fun library experience, actually. I walked up to the counter and I told the woman who was standing there, "Hi, I would like to check out these books." And she said, "Could I see your library card?" And I said, "I don't have one." And she said, "Okay, what's your name?" And I said, last name Shanty, first name Ethan. And she said, "Oh, you're Ethan Shanty of the Ethan Shanty fame." And I thought, yeah, I guess. And she was middle name Kelly. I was like, yeah, that's me. And then I didn't think to ask, is that a good fame or a bad fame? That's beside the point. I picked up the first Larry McMurtry book called Horsemen Pass By. And I also picked up a time travel novel by Joyce Carol Oates, which I didn't expect that she would write a time travel novel. But there we are. Yeah, both sitting on my desk, as well as my brother sent me this fantasy book. I can't think of Dan Timmons is the author's name. And the book is called Hyperion. And I'm only just
I think I've heard of that.
Yeah, I'm only just a few pages in. Fantasy is a really, really tough sell for me. I think if I had gotten into it when I was younger, it would have a grip on me still. But because I didn't read any fantasy at all until I was like 22 or 23, it doesn't do a whole lot more.
Well, and we could have a whole conversation about this. I think the concern I have with fantasy is just that. Like, I guess the best fantasy creates its own set of rules and worlds, but sort of by its nature, it doesn't have to follow any rules. And so it's sort of hard for me to wrap my head around it.
And I think that a lot of those authors rely on too much exposition and backstory in order to get you into it. But I really prefer when an author just drops me into the world and lets me figure it out on my own. With fantasy, that can be a little bit more difficult, but hey, what can you do?
Hey, we'd love to know what you're reading. And how can you get in touch with us, Ethan?
You can reach out to the show by writing to Mitch at ncpr.org. And here's a list of all of the people who make this program possible. Northwards is an NCPR podcast production. The show is written, produced, and edited by Mitch Teich with digital production supervision by me. I'm Ethan Shanty. Our theme music is by the Wickmore Jazz Trio of Plattsburgh. Bill Hanel is our digital director. Caitlin Kelly handles our social media. And you can learn more about this show and support it with a financial contribution at ncpr.org/northwards. This is NCPR North Country Public Radio.